I'm currently hitting up about 10 to 20 landlords a day, over 100 landlords per week. And now I'm currently sitting out of my portfolio with 8 Airbnbs. I don't own any of them. I don't have any ownership. I just had the right conversation with the right type of people. What's going on, guys? I'm doing over $100,000 and I don't own a single property. I just have my 8th Airbnb, and in this video I'm going to be showing you guys the exact words that I use in order for the landlord to say yes. Believe it or not, most of the time people that try this business just don't know exactly what to say or how to handle a certain conversation. So, in the beginning when I first got started, it took me about 60 landlords before I got my first yes. Now I've gotten so much experience, so much confidence, to the point where like 1 out of 10 landlords say yes to me instead of 1 out of 60. So in this video, we're going to be going through from the exact initial message all the way to me signing the lease. But before we go over the messages, I do want to explain why this actually works. So when you understand these two things from a landlord's perspective, everything just clicks a lot smoother. Now, this is something that, landlords don't really talk about, but they really only want two things. They want, one, their cash flow, which is their rent, the first of every month, and two, they want someone who takes care of the property just like it's their own. So when people are hitting up the landlord saying, hey, can I run an Airbnb in your home? All they're going to hear is, one, parties, strangers, and liabilities. And you're going to trigger the wrong reaction, and they're ultimately going to leave you on red, or they're going to say no. So when you learn how to flip the script and you learn how to demonstrate to the landlord that you are actually the answer to all of their problems, your conversion rate will just flip completely. And the beautiful part about this is that you don't need some great huge portfolio. You don't need any properties to start of your own. You just need to learn to really understand the landlord and how to properly do a sales pitch to convince them that you are the right fit.
All right, so this is the first message that I sent to Lacey. Now notice how I kept it really short. I said, hey Lacey, my company is interested in renting this apartment for 1 or 2 years. Is this something we can discuss? I didn't go straight into the sales pitch. I just wanted to get some type of engagement and also just poke your curiosity. Now, the first message is always the most important, guys, because if you do not send the correct message in the beginning, then the rest doesn't matter because they're just going to block you from their head. So I actually got this deal from Facebook Marketplace. Facebook Marketplace is one of my preferred platforms in terms of like finding apartments, but we could also use Zillow, which I do use, Hotpass, apartments.com, or any third-party site that has apartments. And this is actual screenshot of what my inbox will look like. Notice how all of this is just from one day, Tuesday, and that's because this is a numbers game, guys. The toughest part about this is finding the landlord, of course, to give you a yes. So I'm constantly hitting about 10 to 20 landlords per day, which means I'm hitting over 100 landlords per week. Now, as you can imagine, out of those 100 landlords, there has to be a handful that are interested or that give me a yes. Typically right now, I would say it takes an average about 30 to 60 days for someone to like start and have their first Airbnb up and running. So, at this point, it's just a matter of like, are you guys willing to put in the volume? Now, I always start off the conversation a little bit different because, like I said, we just want some form of like engagement. So I'll say something like, hey, for example, Brian, are you the landlord? Or hey, Brian, do you accept corporate leasing? Now that way they're able to, engage with me, and then that's when I can send the sales script. And then, we could even poke the curiosity, because the majority of the times when I send this message about, hey, do you accept corporate leasing? They're going to say something like, hey, what's corporate leasing? What do you mean? And then the people who just say no flat out, or that don't even understand where we're going at, we want to avoid those type of people because like they're already closed-minded. This is the property that my 8th Airbnb that I signed is a 3-bed, 1-bath for $3,200. Nice, modern. These are the type of properties we want to look for. Now, an example that I sent you guys, we actually got a response. This is 3 a.m. I don't know what this person was doing up at 3 a.m. Some demon time. That's what I'm thinking. But she basically she connected me with the real estate agent, which is Roberta. So Roberta, I sent her a message. I sent her the screenshot, and then just to make sure that so she could see that the landlord said yes about this. But essentially, she started asking me the questions of like a regular real estate agent, like, hey, like what are you looking for? How many people? What's your move-in date? And then I got straight into work. That's when I started to. I eventually hopped on the phone call, really explain exactly what I do, and that's exactly what we're gonna go over, guys. Because eventually, the best course of action is eventually hopping on a phone call with either the real estate agent or the landlord, and we're gonna explain why in just a second.
All right, so we're in phase 3, guys, and this is the phone call. This is by far one of the most important parts, because I know a lot of you are gonna say, hey Alec, can I just text and email and finish this deal? But I'm telling you guys, when you hop on a phone call and he hears how calm and confident you are, there's a shift there's a shift into the whole conversation, into the whole sales pitch, where he starts building some type of trust. He hears your voice for the first time. He's hearing how confident you are, how experienced you are, and then that's some foundation of trust. And so at this point, you're one step closer to getting that yes. Now, it's very important that when you do this, you want to reassure him, like, we're not really trying to convince him into the sales, but we're trying to remove any type of fear or risk that he sees potentially in his business model. Because in the beginning, we already did the sales pitch. Now it's just kind of addressing the key points that he has, any concerns. So it'll go something like this. It'll be like, hey, Brian, I noticed this property 123 Main Street. Do you have any other properties in the area? You want to establish some type of like conversation, try to build a connection with him. And then when you sound bigger than what you are, a lot of key points I like to say when it comes to the landlord is saying something like, hey, listen, we have 10 other properties over here in the Boston area that are cash flowing us. So even if we have one bag egg in the basket, we have these other 10 properties that are cash flowing. So you are guaranteed your rent despite, how we operate as a company. And so when they start hearing that professionalism, that confidence, it just makes it so much easier for them to accept it and say yes. Now, at that point, guys, you want to just reassure them on the two priorities that the landlord has, which is one, their money, their rent, their cash flow, the first of every month, and two, you want to make sure that you're letting them know, like, hey, listen, my team does bi-weekly cleanings. We'll constantly have people coming into the property, making sure everything's well maintained and operating correctly. And when you say something like that, it's music to their ears. You're going to be way more convinced, especially with the way you say it. And then, that's when you could just take a step back, take a pause, and see what they have to say. And then they're of course going to follow up with any questions or concerns. And then it's going to be your job to address those concerns into the next few slides. So let's get into it.
Now, these are a couple of key words and like the glossary I like to say of like, when we start to fix up a vocabulary, because this is super, super important, guys, because if you don't know how to properly do the sales pitch, then more than likely, this is the reason why you're not getting any success. So a couple of key words to go over is short-term rental. That's basically like anything being rented 29 nights or less. Now, it doesn't matter if it's 27, 26, 1 week, 2 weeks. If it's less than 29 nights, it's considered short-term. And this is very, very important. We also have midterm rental, which is 30 days plus. Now, keep in mind, it's still, less than a year. So if it's between that 1 year to 30 day, range, then it's considered midterm. And this is very important because we also include midterm in our business model. We also have long-term, which is the standard 12-month lease. You're going to hear ADR a lot, average daily rate, how much we charge. Sublease, subletting, all it means is that we're allowed to rent it out to other people, other tenants. You're going to hear clientele. Clientele are just kind of the guests that we are housing on Airbnb, but it just sounds more professional. And vetted tenants. Vetted tenants, landlords love the word vetted tenants. Vetted tenants just means renters who have gone a vigorous, background screening procedure. So why is this important? Now, this is very important because when you are able to implement, guys, the right words and, you're able to execute them the right way, it just makes it so much more professional, more convincing, and it just sounds like you know what you're talking about. Instead of just saying something like, hey, I'm running an Airbnb business. Can I Airbnb your property? You're going to say, hey, I'm running a mid to short-term rental business. And the reason why we say this instead of Airbnb is because this will actually trigger a negative response, because all the landlord will hear when you say Airbnb business is parties and liabilities. Now, truly, Airbnb is a short-term midterm rental business. And so we're not even just saying Airbnb in general. We're just basically describing what the actual business is. Another common thing I like to say is like, hey, with these, short-term midterm rentals, we will house our traveling clientele that are vetted tenants. Now, notice how I didn't just say, hey, we rent to Airbnb guests, because when you just say that, you're not taking control. All they hear is strangers. Like anyone could be in their property, and then these are things that the landlord will fear. And so when we say something like, hey, we have vetted tenants, which what we just said that they are renters who have gone a vigorous background screening procedure, they're going to start to think, okay, this company knows what they're talking about. They're putting in the property like people that we would have rented to, and they have their own procedures and they know what they're doing. So now to the sales script, once we get some type of engagement, I'll say something like this. I'll say like, hey, Brian, I'm an acquisition manager at company name LLC. We work with landlords to lease apartments long-term to house our traveling clientele on a mid to short-term basis. Now, this is like travel nurses, foreign exchange students, vetted corporate travelers. We handle all upfront costs such as first and security and furnish the unit at our expense. We also handle the rent every month despite occupancy and do bi-weekly cleanings to ensure the property is always in excellent condition. This is something we can discuss. Now, a couple of notes, right? Couple of things to mention, and why I mention them is, first off, I say long-term lease. And this essentially, makes her aware that, hey, your money is handled, it's secured. We're going to be renting it, as a long-term tenant, which is exactly what you want. You don't got to deal with the middle part. You're just getting your rents every month. I also mentioned vetted travelers clientele, which is reassuring her of who's staying in the property, and we basically have control over it. And this handles her fear of having just strangers in the home. I also mentioned how we handled rents every month despite occupancy, and this is one of the biggest incentives in this business model. And notice how in this whole little script I didn't say Airbnb once. This is basically how Airbnb works, but I didn't say Airbnb once. It just sounds more professional, more reassuring, and then that builds some confidence and trust between me and the landlord, right? Now, you always got to keep in mind when you're doing the sales pitch, whether you're texting them or calling them, is that the landlord wants two things, guys: their money, which is their rent, the first of every month, and they also just want to make sure they have someone that's renting the property that is keeping it clean and maintaining it like as if it were their own. Now, when you're able to incorporate these two things into the sales pitch, and the phone call, then they're just going to feel 10 times more reassuring, and you're one step closer to a yes. Now, some common things, right, that you're going to hear a lot tremendously when it comes to on a phone call, whether it's you doing the text back and forth or the emailing, are the most common questions that I get when it comes to any concerns that the landlord may have, which is one, what happens if something breaks in the property? They're always going to ask something like that because they want to know who's going to be ultimately liable. Now, this is when you can bring up your insurance. You could be like, hey, listen, we have a $1 million insurance policy. So, God forbid, if anything happens that the tenant does break a hole in the wall, we will cover that. We will make the claim. We will cover that. You don't have to worry about anything that the tenant does. Now, when you say this, guys, it's very important that you also describe to them, be like, hey, listen, you are still responsible of landlord, duties, the landlord responsibilities. If HVAC goes, the fridge goes, they gotta do some type of piping repair, they are still obligated to fix that. And this is one of the beautiful benefits of arbitrage. You are not the landlord. You do not have these type of liabilities. So when it comes to spend $20,000 for a new roof, you don't gotta pay that. That's the landlord's responsibility. Now, another thing I always like to mention is there's always a third party, because it is true. Airbnb does provide a $1 million insurance policy. Well, of course, we don't say Airbnb. We just tell them that we have a $1 million insurance policy. But if they wanted something even on top of that, and this is something you guys could use too for your own protection, there's something called property insurance, which is specially made for short-term rentals. And this is just a third-party insurance carrier that you could provide for an extra layer of protection. Now, another common thing that they'll say is hey, how do you know who's coming in and out of the property, or if they're making too much noise? Now, this is a common question I always get, and this is one of the things we will say to reinsure them. Say, hey, listen, we install cameras on the every entryway of the property. So more than likely it'll be the front door and the back door, and these cameras will be Ring cameras, the ones we actually put on. And then that way it'll pick up any detection, record it, and then it'll notify you as well. That way you as the host could also see who's coming in and out of the property. There's no parties going on, and if they do, then that's when you and your team get to handle the situation. Be like, hey, you told us only 6 people are going to be here. You can't have more than that without our approval. Noise, same thing too. They always hey, they always ask these kind of questions, but it's kind of it would have been a regular tenant. You can't really restrict regular tenants bring in a family member over or a friend over. You know what I'm saying? So you just got to mention them. Be like, hey, listen, we don't want to disturb the neighbors either. So we'll actually add noise detectors in order to see hey, listen, we have quiet hours. We have our own rules that we implement. So if they break these rules and they're having loud noises at 1 a.m, our detectors will pick up on that. And then that way we're able to be hey, you're being too noisy. Our detectors are picking up on that. We'll give you a warning, but after the first warning, we're going to have to ask you guys to leave. And then you can also explain to them, have your own procedures. And that has never happened because the type of tenants that you guys get are respectable tenants. But that's another layer of reinsurance. Another thing they'll always ask, be hey, listen, what if you're, how is it possible that you guys are able to pay rent if you guys are not busy, or, for God forbid, the property stays empty for a month? Then that's when you get to leverage funding. Now, funding, there's a couple of ways to kind of leverage that. One, when you hop on a phone call, you're talking with them, you always want to sound bigger than what you are. You always want to let them know. I always love playing this kind of this funny game where it's you just got to pretend to be a character almost. You got to, even if you only don't have any Airbnbs as your first one getting started, you always have to sound bigger than what you are. I always say something hey, Brian, we have over 10 properties in the area that are constantly giving us cash flow. So even if we have one bag egg in the basket, we have these other 9 properties that will be giving us cash flow in order to compensate for this one bad property. And then that way they're okay, yeah, that makes sense. This person knows what he's talking about. And then sometimes too, when it comes to proving these funds, sometimes a lot of my own students will actually leverage my portfolio, which is one of the most the best benefits of having a mentor. If not, there's just so many different ways of proving funds, but you could always just send me a message privately and I could show you a couple of tricks of how we could kind of finesse that. But funding is actually available. A lot of my students do end up getting funding through a connect of mine. He's an underwriter bank. So funding will always be available for qualified applicants. So if you guys also had a question about that, just send me a message and we could get you connected. Another common thing is kind of referrals, recommendations, websites. I always tell people, like, listen, it's very easy to, build a fake website nowadays. You can literally make it in like 10 to 15 minutes. But if you did not want to create a fake website just for the, for the purpose of credentials, I always like to do two things. I always like to recommend my other landlords that love me. So also another benefit of having another mentor, of having other properties in the Airbnb. But if not, it's just like a standard, other lease. Put your mom on it, put your brother on it, tell them to lie for you, and then just have them sound like some landlords. And if not, then I always send like a link to one of my Furnish Finder accounts. So in this case, you might not have a Furnish Finder one, but at that point, I would just kind of go with either the fake website route or just going through the the referrals, whether they're fake ones or real ones. But if you're working with me, you'll definitely get some real ones. So that's pretty much the most common questions I get, guys. Other than that, you're the one taking control. You just have to keep in mind, guys, that at the end of the day, like, a lot of these landlords don't know exactly 100% how your business works and how you operate. So you basically have the full control in terms of like leading this conversation. And all you're really doing at this point, once they kind of like have that, poke of curiosity, is that you're removing any type of fears, any type of concerns, and you're addressing the solutions. And then ultimately, once you do address that solution, and you're basically letting them know, like, hey, listen, we're giving you what you want. We're giving you the rent. We're making sure the property is well maintained. So what's stopping us from signing the lease? And then once you guys end up signing the lease, exactly what I did with my 8th Airbnb, you want to make the contract. I do all of my contracts through Rocket Lawyer. They're excellent in terms of like creating and doing all your legal binding contracts. So Rocket Lawyer is the platform that I'll use for all my contracts. Of course, you want to make sure that they're properly formed, but that's exactly what I've said and done in order to close all of my Airbnbs.
All right, so let me put this numbers into perspective. When I first got started, I hit up about 60 landlords before I got my first yes. Now, I'm not saying this to scare you, but I'm just telling you this because the people who are giving up after 10 tries, 20, 30 tries aren't going to be the ones that lock in the property in 1 or 2 months. Now, I'm currently hitting up about 10 to 20 landlords a day, over 100 landlords per week, and now I'm currently sitting out of my portfolio with 8 Airbnbs. I don't own any of them. I don't have any ownership. I just had the right conversation with the right type of people. So the question is, are you willing to put in the volume? Now, if you want the exact word-for-word script and guide that I use for my landlords, just DM me the word lease on Instagram and I'll send it over to you guys. And look, if you're interested in working one-on-one with me to get your very first property locked in, up and running, then click on the link down below. Most people get it up and running within 60 days. So take a look, see if it's a good fit. If so, reach out. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.